Welcome back to the Anarchy Analysis Prediction Series. We're live once again for the third week of the LEC Summer Split. We've got 10 games on our nice docket, but before we get to them, let's go over the results from last weekend. Obviously, 10 games in total. We saw a stunning 6 out of 10 result, where we dropped an equal amount of games on each day. Day 1 we dropped the BDSSK series and the MDK Vitality one, and on day 2 we dropped the Vitality Team Heretics and the Rogue G2 game. Now that being said, a lot of action took place there, and that does affect how we're looking at this week. So let's get into our matchup of the week, where we can discuss some major changes with how the league is shaping up. Our matchup of the week sees Giant X taking on Vitality. Now this game intrigued me, as both teams, I'd say some aren't living up to expectations, as well as kind of have been a bit shaky overall throughout this year, to be honest. Vitality came into the split struggling week 1, not looking at all like a team that was in playoffs for the previous 2 splits, being quite strong in how they actually perform in them, whereas their opponents today, Giant X, they've just not been the best, I would say. Now, realistically speaking, what I think will happen is probably a Vitality win. In fact, that's who I've predicted. But we're going to have to dissect how these two teams have played overall, due to the fact that they aren't going to be as fluid as some of the previous matches we've looked at this year. And that is going to be quite an interesting take, considering we're used to watching like G2, a team that's been dominant throughout the entire year, or Fnatic as well, this split being very strong. We aren't getting that, and that's going to be the interesting aspect of this matchup. Regardless of that, I've predicted a Vitality win, which leads us into our next game. So we get into our second game this weekend, which is technically the first one of day number 1. It is Team Rogue taking on BDS. Now, typically speaking, Rogue have been weird this year, and it's this awkward state of games that they get to, where sometimes they're winning and doing very well, but then it's just that transitioning into a killer instinct to finish games that they're struggling with. And it's been a present flaw through all iterations of this roster this year. Now, personally speaking, I think that the flaws are being seen in the jungle more than anything. Marcoon is kind of getting punished quite a lot, I would say. And teams that are better or are just at a good level are punishing his playstyle, stealing camps, destroying his chances of playing the game, and it's resulting in other players who may get ahead not having support when it comes to the late game, and that is costing Rogue. And that killer instinct they used to have where they won an entire championship no longer exists, and it's kind of unfortunate, as the whole aspect of their opposition, I think the opposite sometimes. I think Shao as a player, while I never used to rate him I've got a lot more respect for how he plays the game, per se. Sure, he may be toxic out of pro play and not be the nicest of person to speak to then, but in an actual pro setup, he plays very well, and realistically speaking, sets up his laners for success. Nuke especially, very well off from that playstyle, has essentially grown into a top tier mid laner per se, as he's just been very strong as a whole. And going into Larson, a guy that used to be quite strong, having 2 off seasons, I would say, more than anything, it's going to be an interesting bout for sure. Now, as you can tell by how I'm wording this, I think that BDS will win, and as a whole, the team synergy issues that we used to see may not be there. We don't know the behind the scenes of BDS, that'd be the only thing that I would say. However, I think they're stronger on paper, I think that they're playing better, and as a whole, will do better here against Rogue. Next up, we have Team Heretics versus SK Gaming. I had to remember then in my head who Team Heretics were playing, because while technically I wouldn't say SK split has been unmemorable, it's certainly been unexpected how well they're actually performing, as they're sitting in second, only dropping 1 game to split to the team in first, which is Fnatic, but they're performing exceptionally well as a whole, and they're very good at what they want to do, and it's nice to see certain players revitalized in terms of like Niski, who's stepping back up to the plate, performing great. It's allowing for his bot lane to then carry and do work. I think we're seeing a little bit more of a tamer Isma this split compared to the previous 2, where he's just been going gung-ho on champs like Rel and destroying people by just going in or getting punished for going in without his team. That's the kind of not as prevalent. However, I would say SK as a whole are performing in peak performance, to be honest, and they're very hard to beat right now. Speaking of their opponents, Team Heretics, the team I can't really put a finger on how well they're performing. I think that statistically speaking, they're a bit more of a mid-level team, mid-card. I think that they're stepping into that twilight era of their careers, some of the players, but to be honest, I think Jackie's has finally found his footing in the league. He's certainly performing at a consistent level. Wonder isn't as shaky as what he was 2 splits ago, or this last year. He's certainly found his level of performance of old, and isn't really a issue with this Heretics lineup. And in fact, I think a lot of the things that Heretics are doing is consistent, and it's performing well, which is delivering them results. And their opponents, I think, are in a similar boat. They're being consistent and finding results, but their style is slowly melding together into something strong. And realistically speaking, considering SK is pretty much a newly formed bot lane into this team, finding their footing as early as they have certainly is benefiting them, and I do believe that this game here is going to be a good one, and I personally think that SK will win, though, to be honest, if I just actually look at my scorecard, yeah, I did put SK. Glad to see that Tired Me and me 2 hours ago have the same results. So yeah, I think SK personally just are at that next level right now that is just very dominant and other teams probably could learn a lot from. Well, this is a bit of an interesting one. G2 versus Carmine Corp. And I'm gonna be honest, both on different trajectories compared to how they have been for the past 2 splits. Carmine Corp looking better than what we've seen of them. Certainly bringing in a literal LCK champion and then an LCS champion has done wonders to this lineup. It's almost like they're not the same team that floundered for 2 splits in a row. And I'm gonna be honest, the bot lane still weirds me out, considering how inconsistent they were during the previous 2 splits, but hey, they're performing. Upset is fragging like an absolute madman, and they're doing well. As for their opponents, G2, kind of a different story. They're struggling. Middle of the pack at the moment, not really looking the same sort of squad that dominated this league for years. But again, we go back to the fact that do they need to try this split? No, they're already in season finals. They're pretty much guaranteed first seed for season finals. So who cares for them? They already have their top spot kind of guaranteed. They don't really give a crap. And so when I talk about predicting G2 games, to be honest, you could quite easily say it's a heads or tails sort of game, or not if they want to win. Now, don't get me wrong, they probably do want to win another trophy and go undefeated all split season long in terms of the LEC trophy holding, and just have like 3 shields being held up by Romain going into the season finals, but nah, that won't happen. Instead, what I think will happen is this game will be a bit of a brawl. I think this is Casey's tester more than anything, where G2 will probably just bring the hammer down on the hopes and dreams of the French organisation, just to let them know this is G2's league. You can bring in some former LCK champions, but they will still win. And I think that is a genuine thought going through G2's head going into this weekend, because let's be honest, Carmine Corp have brought in the most, I'd say, competitive team. Former champions in across each lane, to be honest, minus the middle lane, but former champions of different regions, more specifically the LCK I'm looking at. That's a real tester for Broken Blade, to be honest, competing against Kana. And that is something I like, and it's why I kind of think, if I check my notes again, because Tired Me is in a toss-up mood, I've gone with G2, good. But yeah, I think that we could see an absolute bloodbath of a game that I really want to watch. And lastly, for day number 1, it is MDK taking on FNC, or Mad Lions Koi taking on Fnatic. I'm interested by this one because, as a whole, the 2 teams are pretty weird, I would say. Previous splits or years, you would assume these 2 teams fighting neck and neck to be who the challengers to G2. This split and the previous, not so much. Fnatic have been that team that is contesting G2, and in fact they're certainly performing a lot better than others expected of them. But their opponents, MDK, kind of slipping more than anything. Struggling this split as well as last, and barely scraped into playoffs. Now, granted, they did go on a little bit of a comeback during playoffs, but they're struggling to find form, and I think it's awkward for them because of the fact that they're losing to teams they should beat. They're beating teams they shouldn't really have an issue with, but typically are, and that is something that is counter to what Fnatic are doing. They're dominant against everyone, and it is very strong because Razork is just, he's on a different level this split. It's like you go chrome with your hair and you're just a beast, to be honest, and it is certainly evident in Fnatic style. And this split, they've just stepped up to a new level. I think that the roster is gonna be a hard one to break, and I do believe obviously this game will go over to Fnatic purely based on recent form. I think that they'll just decimate the Battle Lines Koi strategy and probably cause some draft issues, which is something a lot of teams are kind of showing this year. But hey, another game down. Let's rattle out through day number 2. Let's go, shall we? Day 2, all 5 games. Rogue versus Team Heretics. Rogue kicking off both days, interesting. I've gone with a Team Heretics win. GX versus BDS, I've gone with a BDS win. Fnatic versus G2, an absolute banger of a matchup. I've gone with Fnatic. SK take on MDK, and I have gone with SK. And lastly, I've got KC versus Vitality on my docket, and a Vitality win. Bit of an interesting one there, kind of surprising. But regardless, I think that their results will go in favour of them. Regardless of that, that's going to be it for today. Thank you very much for joining me. If you've enjoyed these predictions, leave a like down below. No face cam, because who wants to see a guy who looks dead to the world because he's only just woken back up from an evening siesta. But yeah, that's that. Leave a like down below. Subscribe if you want to. Comment your predictions below as well. See you guys next time. Peace out.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life, I never miss, that's fact, taking big